2020 may be the summit's 30th anniversary, but it is also the 25th anniversary of the UN Fourth World Conference on Women, which was hosted in Beijing, China in 1995. It was a benchmark conference attended by 40,000 women primarily from all over the world. And it is a benchmark because 189 nations signed on to a platform for action. And that is now the benchmark we use against which we measure progress. Now, the leader who is going to spearhead that commemoration, the 25th anniversary of Beijing plus 25, is Undersecretary General of the United Nations, Phumzile Mlambo Nguka, whose first summit was 1998 in London, when she said to me, I don't want to meet my colleagues in hallways and in the bathroom. We need our own forum. And that's how the Ministerial Roundtable happened. So now the floor is yours. Undersecretary Phumzile Mlambo Nguka.
The 25 years of the Beijing Declaration, we are also celebrating 20 years of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution 1325. We are marking 75 years of the United Nations and 10 years of UN Women. All these anniversaries must mean something to women, women's lives, and to progress. In 1945, when the United Nations was formed, there were no women heads of states. In Beijing in 1995, in the world, there were 11 women heads of state. In 2020, when we are marking 25 years of the Beijing Declaration, there were 22 heads of states and heads of government in the world. Slow progress. Progress nevertheless, but slow. This is the pattern throughout. We've reached a point now when we want to move in a faster, bolder, and significant way, and to create change that will last and will make drastic changes in the quality of women's lives. We are also dealing with a pandemic which threatens all these gains. My request to the ministers is that they should make sure in their countries that the fiscus and the stimulus packages that are being provided to bring about relief also benefit women. Women in the informal sector, women-owned businesses, women who are working in the service sector, tourism, hospitality, and that social protection also benefits women in a meaningful way. I'm also asking if ministers can also make sure that we address the issue of unpaid care so that women can be relieved of the burden of care so they can look for work and education. I am asking women to do their best to bring about change in their countries when it comes to gender-based violence. Invest in making sure that women have access to services that they need to deal with gender-based violence, especially civil society that service women who are in difficulties. But more than anything else, we need to prevent violence from happening. So pay attention to the criminal justice system of your country. I wish you good deliberations, and I hope that soon we will be able to meet in person. Thank you.
I was one of the organizers of the Beijing Forum and the NGO Forum in Beijing, which was huge. I have to tell you, the excitement was tremendous. Today, we are very fortunate to have in our opening forum 4 great leaders who had important roles at that meeting in Beijing. And to lead the discussion among them, we are also fortunate to have Financial Times editor Isabel Berwick for Reports and Careers. So Isabel, the floor is yours and the program is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. It's a great honor to be here. and welcome everyone, wherever you are, to this ministerial roundtable featuring 4 very distinguished women, each of whom played a very important role in the 1995 World Conference on Women in Beijing. It's now recognised as a landmark event in the history of women's leadership and development. I'm Isabel, the Work and Careers Editor at the Financial Times in London, and I wanted to introduce our 4 distinguished guests to reflect on what has and hasn't changed since 1995. First, I'd like to invite Gertrude Mongella, who is the chair of the Beijing conference. She's a lifelong champion for women's rights and has served as UN Assistant Secretary General and in ministerial positions for the Tanzanian government. Gertrude was also the first recipient of the Global Summit of Women's Global Leadership Award in 2004. Gertrude, could you join us on the call? I'll introduce the next panelist while I'm waiting for Gertrude. Tarja Halonen was president of Finland from 2000 to 2012. Gertrude, hello. Prior to her election as the country's first female head of state, she was an MP for 6 terms and a campaigner for human rights, social justice and equality. She has also received the Global Summit of Women's Global Leadership Award, and this time in 2010. President Halonen, welcome. Sylvia Hernandez led the Mexico delegation at the 1995 conference. She's a 3-term senator and a former secretary of tourism in Mexico, and went on to become founding partner of Estrategia Pública Consultores, which specializes in designing successful strategies for public decision-making. Sylvia, if you joined us, great to see you.
Hi, Isabel.
Hi. And Melanne Verveer was chief of staff to Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady, and in 2009 was appointed the first ambassador at large for global women's issues at the US State Department. She's now executive director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace and Security. Melanne, welcome.
Thank you, Isabel.
So I wanted to start off by looking back, really. So this ministerial roundtable is taking place during the 25th anniversary year of the 4th World Conference on Women. And you were all leaders who participated there. And it was such a global gathering involving 40,000 women. And I wanted to start by asking each of you in turn. I'm going to start with Gertrude, who chaired the conference. What did you do then? And 25 years later, what are your lasting impressions of that conference? Gertrude, can you start off? Because you must have had an amazing ringside seat there.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
Oh, I'm struggling to hear you, Gertrude.
It's a great pleasure to be with you this round table
Oh.
of the world. Can you hear me?
Gertrude, I'm not able to hear you. I'm going to go to Melanne, and perhaps we could come back to you in a second. If you could take your volume up. Melanne, could you pick up while we wait for Gertrude?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Isabel. At the time, I was chief of staff to Hillary Clinton, who was First Lady of the United States, obviously. And our office was the hub for preparations for Beijing for the United States. And it was our goal to ensure that it was serious and purposeful, meaningful, and engaged all of the women around the country so that it wasn't just an elite undertaking. So we had several challenges we had to confront. One was to ensure that this could be about everybody. And so there were many meetings bringing in women leaders and others from the community level up. There was addressing the challenges that came. We're still experiencing pushback today, but back then there were challenges about this was a conference that was going to create 5 genders. It was going to destroy the family. Many of the themes that still plague our effort to make the progress we want to make stymied us then, but we had to overcome them. There were those who said we shouldn't go to Beijing because they have a nefarious human rights record, but it was in Beijing, not a Beijing conference. So there were many of these kinds of hurdles that had to be overcome. And then we had to put together a delegation that would exemplify the seriousness of this undertaking. And Madeleine Albright, who was then the UN ambassador for the United States, was selected to head the delegation. And our delegation was extremely diverse because the goal was to mirror the face of America from the community level to the national level. with many significant leaders like Jerry Ferraro and Donna Shalala and others, besides those who were working at the state and local level. It was an extraordinary undertaking. The determination was that what was decided would be applied back home. And before we left for Beijing, President Clinton created the Interagency Task Force on Women that worked out of the White House so that the good ideas from Beijing would be integrated into our government decision-making and make a difference for the whole country. It was an unforgettable moment. And the only way I could sum up what it represented was to say that to this day, if you meet a woman or if she introduces herself to you, she will give her name. And if it is the case, she will say, "And I was in Beijing." And that sums up what this conference represented in terms of the imprint it made and what it continues to do to motivate all of us to create what was the goal of this conference, to have women equal to men, to close that gender gap, and to say that women's rights are indeed human rights.
Quite so. And Sylvia, I believe you led the Mexican delegation. What are your abiding memories of that time? Oh, you're on mute still.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, Isabel, I had the privilege of heading the delegation of Mexico. And there were several challenges associated with that role. The first one was, as Melanne was telling us, was to think about the group that was to represent Mexico. Mexico is a very diverse country. So we needed to have a very diverse delegation. It was impossible to have every age sector and every economic status sector and regional sectors. So what we decided was to put together a group that might reflect the diversity of the country. But how did we do that? We thought that it was good to have a group that represented political and advocacy standpoints. So we had right-leaning and left-leaning women. We had religious leaders and NGO leaders, but we were 40 of us. So it was a mosaic of women, which was the most gratifying challenge. It was to coordinate and to be successful because we had to do a number of things at the same time. So we had to work together, open space for the discussion inside the group because we were, in many ways, we were opposite to each other, but never to forget that we were representing Mexico. I think that was very challenging. I can tell you, very gratifying. My impression, first impression, memorable impression was this mosaic of women of the world, mosaic of colors and cultures and dresses and languages and creeds. So I think that there was a portrait of the women of the world there. That is memorable, I can tell you, and I will always remember that.
I've watched quite a bit of it on YouTube and it does look absolutely amazing. And Tarja, what was your role at the conference and what are your abiding memories?
So, first of all, if you allow, I said it's wonderful to see my old friends now here in the same video. So, I was a foreign minister of Finland, pretty new one, and I was the first female foreign minister, and sad enough, nobody female after that. But anyway, so I was leading the Finnish delegation in the Beijing conference, and because I was quite new one, so of course the whole Beijing conference and the discussions we had was something very new and very groundbreaking for me. And I remember that there were a lot of people, especially these NGOs, representatives who were mainly in the different places where we were, the official representatives. There were some speculations beforehand concerning China and the human rights, of course, and all that. But China has done very good work, and everything was doing very well, better than what we expected. And then I must admit confess that the outcome, that was a little bit a surprise even for us, the participants. Of course, we have made a lot of requests and demands, and we thought that perhaps we don't get them, and so. But then we get a very, very positive surprise. We succeeded, and I can say that this declaration is still today. It's very, very important. Sometimes even people say that whether we would make a success with that today. But anyway, that was for me, myself, and I know that my Finnish friends, it was something that encouraged us very much. Even people might think that we were pretty advanced country already in that day, but to see all these thousands of women, that was really something.
Thank you. And Gertrude, you're back. You're on mute though. Could you take yourself off mute? Because I'd love to hear. Great.
Yes.
And you had the leading role at the conference, Gertrude. Could you tell us what you did and your abiding impressions?
First of all, I would like to thank all those who organized this round table. It reminds us of so many years back, 25 years back, and for the Ministerial round table, 30 years. That's a long time. It's a person's life. And I think those who were born those years are now graduates from universities participating in the implementation of what we decided in Beijing. I would like to say I was given a very huge task to perform, one which I didn't, I was excited, but at the same time frightened. But what I want to say today is it's the women, it's not only me as Secretary General of the conference who prepared the Beijing conference. It was prepared by everybody, our governments, our non-government organizations, and the women in particular. So I owe a lot of these achievements to the women of the world. And since we left Beijing, we made our own commitments from our governments and ourselves. The women have never rested. Wherever I go all over the world, the women are busy implementing the World Conference on Women. The platform has been another Bible or another holy book. People refer to it, people have taken actions, and I want to say the role I played was just a small, minute role, but the majority of all of you played a big role. So I want to applaud all of you after 25 years that my role as Secretary General of the World Conference was enhanced by all the women of the world.
That's great to hear, and I'm really pleased you've been able to join us, Gertrude. And Sylvia, I wanted to throw it forward a bit now, and starting with you, what do you think was the most successful outcome of the conference? What's with us today that we can thank you all for?
Well, Isabel, I think when I think of Beijing, I think of Beijing as a moment when women of the world said they had had enough of good intentions. Because as my colleagues have mentioned, we designed a plan of action with measurable goals. I'm sure that Beijing was the base for a generation of institutions, legislations, and national programs all around the world. If I can put it in a nutshell, I could say its greatest success was to put an end to the age of declarations. We women said, no more rhetoric. And I think that was it.
Great. And Tarja, what would you say is the most successful outcome today? Oh, you're on mute still.
Okay, now we are okay. So I would put it about the same thing in the different words. I would say that, of course, what Hillary Clinton said, that women's rights and human rights was that very, very brilliant core message. But I think also that all of that was important, that the women's rights, we put them on the political agenda. And it was not just something in the marginals, but it was something which was very much in the core. And so after that, no conference, no issue could be passed without saying that where are the women's rights, there are the human rights. And I think that this has been a very, very great thing. And still today, when we know that we have had some steps backwards, we have to repeat. So that way, I think that in Poland, in Turkey, in Belarus, in many other countries, and also with the conventions afterwards made for these human rights, like Istanbul and all this, we have to bring back this main issue of the Beijing. Human rights, women's rights are human rights, and they are the core issue in the most of the cases.
Just to pick up on that with you, Melanne, that must have been something very close to you at that time. Why do you think that's still resonating now?
Well, I think, first of all, in terms of the achievements, it really follows on what the president just said, which is Beijing really chiseled women's rights into human rights law. So when we were in the precursor conference, which was in Nairobi years earlier, it was African women who wanted to put violence against women on the table. Back then, violence against women, it was a private matter. It was a cultural issue. No, it's a crime. It violates the law. Women are human. What came out of Beijing in many ways, immediate work on violence against women. Country after country were passing laws saying to the states, to the nations, you have an obligation to protect women from this abuse. And so it became a criminal issue that needed to be prosecuted. So I can't say enough about what this conference did to once and for all put these issues into that body of international human rights law, not something separate, not something tangential, but absolutely central to rights. And then, as Sylvia said, it was concretized with the platform for action. So it was, here's your blueprint. This is what needs to be done. And it was laid out. It was a catalyzation of a movement in many ways. The movement had been there. Tens of thousands of women represented it. But there was something catalytic about Beijing that unleashed this movement that still works to this very day.
Gertrude, to come to you and pick up on what's been said about violence against women and the catalytic effect of the conference, what would you say is the biggest effect of it?
I think what came out very clearly in Beijing was showing the world that it has been paying lip service to women. Saying, for example, if you look into most of our constitutions and most of our holy books, you always find that it said women are human beings. But that has never been implemented. Instead, we've seen a lot of violence against women in areas of conflict, even in areas without conflict. So Beijing demonstrated very, very, very clear that the world should stop giving lip service to women as human beings. And at one time I did say that we are not invitees on this planet. We belong to the planet. And that's why if you look into the document, you find one of the areas, the economic empowerment of women. Women have been marginalized because they are poor. Women have been marginalized because they don't have a say in the resources of the world, which belong to all of us. So I think in Beijing, it came out very clear. And for me, who visited so many, many areas in the world, I visited many leaders in this world, including the Pope, who is now a saint in the Catholic Church. And just before I came to this meeting, I was reading the letter he wrote to me. He said, Gertrude Mongella, before I even visited him to Rome. And he admitted very clearly that we have to revisit the dignity of women and really appreciate women and stop all the violence against women, give them equal chances and opportunities in the development of their nations.
Gertrude, you've answered my next question there, which was, what's the most pressing thing governments need to do now to make those the visions of Beijing a reality? I wanted to come to you, Tarja. What do you think is, looking forward, we've got very little time now, what's the most pressing thing still on the agenda?
So I think so. I think so that there are a lot of issues, but if I take a positive approach, I would say that since the Beijing, it has been several international agreements and declarations and many made by the United Nations. What has been the reflection to the Beijing, and it has been good, smooth river going forward, but also some backlash. And so I think that I have been very happy with the Millennium Goals, but then also the Agenda 2030, which says already now the first time directly that openly that if we don't achieve the gender equality, so it's no idea to dream about the fulfillment of the Agenda 2030. If I think some sectors which has been extremely difficult in many countries is that the question concerning how the impact of the wars, the armed conflicts are concerning women and girls, and then I think that the resolution 1325 and all what has been added before after that is very important, and it still needs a lot of implementation, and I hope that we can get all the means how we can help each other. The second is what I think is that some very interesting sensitivity concerning the sexual and reproductive rights of the girls and women. It seems to be a very, very difficult issue, but I think that that's also, how could I say, it's in connection with the health, the whole health issue of the girl and women. So that every woman, every child, for instance, idea in the UN has tried to fulfill these gaps. And then just recently, I would say that all that has brought to us so that we have to face it now in COVID-19. We have noticed that both the family violence and also the child marriages and genital mutilation and many such kind of thoughts, what we think that we have already made a victory. So they have come back. And so in that way, I say that it's always good to remember that any kind of the democratic processes, they are not a still photo, but it's a movement. I compare it with the Polish dance, Polonaise, where you take 2 steps forward, 1 backward, but every time when you take a step backward, so the front line is broader, you take more people. And then I always say to my colleagues, my friends, that every time when you feel the backlash, that we should inform each other. Every time when we can feel this kind of backlash, we should think that next time we take the broader front and then we win. So it's always also the...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've got very little time. I just wanted to ask Melanne and Sylvia just to sum up very, very quickly what they think is still left to be done. So thanks so much for that. That's very clear. COVID was mentioned there. Melanne, what would you say still needs to be done?
Well, what all of the data shows, Isabel, is that much has been achieved, but much remains to be achieved. And so we really have to close the existing gaps, which particularly in terms of women's political participation and economic participation are very significant. Following up on what the president just said, the SDGs now become the place that the platform for action moves into at this moment. And SDG 5 is women's empowerment and gender equality. You can't achieve the rest of the SDGs without that one being achieved, whether it's climate, whether it's economic issues, whether it's poverty or hunger. That remains the central issue as it was with Beijing. And then I would say the COVID piece is what is upon us now, and it will have long-term implications. There are a lot of studies that are showing that much that has been achieved could well be pushed back. We've almost reached parity in girls' education on the elementary level. There is every possibility that girls won't return to school in many places. What will that mean? And so the inequalities that COVID has exposed and the disproportionate impact on women is a big part of what we're discussing 25 years ago, where we are today, and that gap that still has to be closed.
I could talk about this all afternoon, but we've already overrun our time, and I'm so sorry. I've just had a wonderful insight into what happened at Beijing in 1995. It's been an absolute honor, and I'm going to thank you all and hand back to Irene.
Okay, thank you so much for this brilliant panel, and thank you, Isabel, for leading us into this discussion.